time for some growing pains for the stuck in ways. Hello, Bryan here again for your Lunar Eclipse Horoscope. This eclipse happens on July 16th at 2:38 p.m. Pacific Time. And this is a biggie. But before we dive into the minutiae of this lunar eclipse, it's important to remember the big picture stuff happening astrologically this year. As I've said in my previous videos, the two big events happening this year are the ongoing Saturn-Pluto conjunction and the Neptune square Jupiter. Saturn is known as the Great Malefic, and Pluto is known as the god of hell, easily the most impactful aspect of the year. With these two baddies in an ongoing tango, this creates a sense of extreme pressure. And this pressure is running through collective human consciousness, asking that we evolve and mature. Saturn is known as the planet of maturation. So Saturn, the Great Malefic, is usually described in a negative light, as a bad thing. And Saturn isn't bad, it's just hard, it's difficult. And Pluto tends to irritate or stimulate our emotional and psychological wounds that are buried deep in the unconscious mind. So humanity as a whole is really feeling the pressure of these two planets, and this will continue on until this energy crescendos in January of 2020, when they become exactly conjunct in the sky. This has already created some colorful events on the world stage, and I expect this trend to continue out through the rest of the year, where we're seeing the crumbling of old, outdated structures. Now this is where we tie in Saturn being in Capricorn. Now Saturn in Capricorn kind of has an old curmudgeon feeling to it, kind of a grouch. So old, stubborn structures of the world, artifacts of the past, which have withstood the test of time, but are starting to lose their grip in the age of Aquarius. The collapse of the old order and end of the patriarchy, old paradigms collapsing, and governments just not functioning very well. And we've seen this all over the world, certainly in the US, in Asia, and in Europe. This energy has created difficult circumstances in our personal lives for a lot of us. And it's not so the universe can treat us as its plaything, but rather to create an opportunity for growth and maturation, and also a massive expansion in consciousness. Jupiter square Neptune describes this potential of boundless expansion, a raising of our consciousness, which leads to greater levels of inspiration and idealism. Now, within that major influence background or backdrop of the year, we can now look to faster-moving personal planets to act as triggers within the entirety of the year, where important events are likely to occur. Like, for example, Mars and Mercury are in a conjunction in the sky right now, and they're in a square to Uranus. Mars and Mercury square Uranus is a perfect example of a potential trigger point event, because Uranus is known as the god of earthquakes and lightning bolts, where things can come out of the blue, sudden disruption and revelation, especially when it's stimulated by a square aspect by the war god Mars and Mercury, the messenger. Pretty much exactly when Mercury went retrograde on the 8th, the billionaire Epstein got busted for child sex abuse. Now he is an example of the power structures in the world, and he got in trouble. And this is an important event because it happened in between the eclipses, and I suspect there'll be a ripple out effect. Currently there are over 105,000 sealed indictments in the US, all created within the last year, and that's way above average. The normal sealed indictment count per year in the US is somewhere around 5,000. Now, the aforementioned Pluto, god of hell, is also known as the monster archetype, which would describe the most heinous possible human behaviors, which are, rooted in psychological trauma, of course, but monsters. Also, Pluto's known as the planet of secrets. So here we are finding the secrets of powerful monsters revealed, and I expect this to continue. Even though eclipses happen on a particular day, they have a very unique time influence associated with them. Usually with planetary events, they come and go, and there's an even area of effect on either side of the event. Not so with eclipses. You take the day of the eclipse, and it starts its effects 1 month prior to the eclipse, and then stretches out 6 months afterwards. This makes me think of an image of a tsunami, actually. When a tsunami happens, first the water recedes. And if you're on an island somewhere and you see the ocean water recede, you know to get to high ground ASAP. So the water recedes, and then boom, a big tsunami wave comes with tremendous force. Now eclipses are kind of like that. First, the month prior to the eclipse, the water is receding, so to speak. And then we have this giant wave of great influence for the next 6 months. So get your surfboards ready. So far, I've given examples of how the energy is affecting us on a grander scale, on the world stage. And there will be an acceleration of these types of events where the old structures are crumbling before our eyes. Now we can take out our microscope and look closely at this lunar eclipse and see how we can use these energies for our betterment and do our own small part within the collective by outgrowing ourselves. So the title of this video is Growing Pains for the Stuck in Ways. Now, of course, we're all stuck in our ways to various degrees, but some more than others, like people who are clinging to great power, for example. So I'm not predicting pain and suffering for everybody, but people who are attached to themselves as they are, that are attached to these structures as they are, who are truly embedded and stuck in their ways stubbornly. They're going to struggle this year. We must always take into consideration the birth chart as context, because the Saturn-Pluto conjunction will be hitting some people's chart really hard and then some not so hard. So it's important to know your own chart. If you want a trained eye to look at your chart more intimately, you can click on my website below and find my services. So we can use the Saturn-Pluto pressure and create diamonds, or we can buckle under the pressure. I really like Aikido principles here, where we use external force and momentum to our advantage. Like Bruce Lee said, be like water. And Cancer, which is the north node, opposite where Saturn and Pluto are, Cancer is a water sign. So water energy is good here, but we'll talk about that in a bit. This lunar eclipse happens right on the Cancer-Capricorn axis, and the moon will actually be right next to Pluto, and Saturn in the south node will be nearby as well. So the tsunami wave is hitting, and I think the next 6 months will be pretty wild. Actually, 6 months out from this eclipse will be January 16th of 2020. Just 4 days after the Saturn and Pluto become exactly conjunct in the sky, where this energy will be at its apex. So there's an interesting time overlap there, or similarity. Since this full moon is happening right next to Saturn in the south node, this reinforces this idea of letting go of the old. But now we tie in the evolutionary astrology perspective, and we tie karma into this, and say the karmic wave is breaking. So yes, letting go of the old, but letting go of the old in the grand scheme of things, meaning multiple lifetimes. Old patterns of behavior that were established in previous lives that continue to occur in this life. The Dalai Lama was once asked about karma, and he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, if you want to understand your karma better, consider your present life circumstances. So history repeats itself. This lunar eclipse is a full moon, and full moons are a time of culmination, of closure, letting go of that what no longer serves you. So time to break the karmic cycle. Now this is going to affect everybody a little bit differently. It's helpful to know where these nodes and Saturn and Pluto are currently transiting through your own birth chart. If it's transiting through the 7th house, it could be related to letting go of things with your relationship or marriage. It could be, 4th house, so dealing with family. 10th house, career. It also could be interacting with planets in your chart. It's very complex. But if you simply look to the house, any stimulation to major planets, you can get an idea of how this is affecting you in your life. But this south node is in Capricorn. So by pointing our noses in the direction of Capricorn, that can be helpful. So letting go of your relationship to power or powerlessness or control issues. Karma creates a bit of a skipping record in us. So releasing these old patterns and habits deeply ingrained in us. I love the idea of doing a writing exercise during this eclipse, and with the intention of just purging the old, letting go. Many years ago, I did what was called a fire puja ceremony. It was a part of my Taoist mysticism class. Now, actually, fire puja, I think, is related to Buddhism, but these mystical traditions like to share and borrow from each other. It was a ceremony of purification, and I think at the time we were working on forgiveness. So we were writing down about people whom we would really love to forgive and let go attachments to. So I really love this idea during this eclipse, doing somewhat of a fire puja ceremony, so to speak, which is to say a somewhat ritualistic ceremonial intention to, write down about these old structures so that you can throw them in the fire to be purified and released. And leverage the superpower that is positive focused intent and intend to let go of the skipping record, to let go of aspects of our character that we no longer want and have overstayed their welcome. The moon is next to Pluto. Now, full moons are usually emotionally charged. Just ask any teacher on the planet. They'll tell you that their students are more rambunctious during full moons. But the fact that it's next to Pluto adds extra emotional intensity. It's a good time to feel deeply into your processes and from the core of your being. The place of knowing, the place that loves all things, from that place, from your heart, say, I consciously choose to let this go. I consciously choose to surrender, and use that intention, and then release it into the fire. We also have some help during this time, because Venus is right next to the North Node during this lunar eclipse. So what is indicated here is that we're not meant to do this process alone. Beautiful, sweet Venus, the goddess of love, is the relationship planet. She's saying it's beneficial to reach out to your loved ones, people who are really close to you, your closest relationships, the people you can count on one hand, the people you would consider your kin, your family, that you can talk about anything with, because Venus is in Cancer. Now, Cancer-type relationships are those kind, the ties that bind. People you trust more than anything. People with whom you go to each other's funeral is one way to look at it. So reaching out to those folks so that they can help support you to release these old patterns. Venus is also the goddess of peace and tranquility. So there's a potential here to develop a more harmonious state of being. And this is supported by you reaching out to others who can be there for you in a moment of great vulnerability, coupled with the intention to heal, to soften, and to release. Softened is a good word to use for the Cancer North Node. There are aspects of our character that have hardened over multiple lifetimes, creating somewhat of a crust over our soul's clear expression. So tapping into this cancering energy, this self-nurturing, we can soften the battle-hardened heart. And this is the higher road. With that, instead of growing pains for the stuck in ways, you embody a water flow type energy of self-care and forgiveness and reduce suffering and transition into a new you. We're being called to take better care of ourselves. We're being called to take better care of each other. We're certainly being called to take better care of this planet. Cancer is nurturing energy. It's mother energy. And here we are on Mama Earth. So it's about time we become caretakers of its resources instead of undertakers of its essence. So bust out your surfboard in one arm, your loved one in the other arm, create a positive intention for release, and ride this tsunami wave right into a more evolved Aquarian future. This is the evolutionary intention, with the goal always being to expand our consciousness.